Beautiful. Take two. Right. We've got a working live stream. It just took two attempts. Apologies about the live stream early today. I'm be cut short. I had an issue with a neighbour who needed sorting out. So unfortunately, I had to cut it short very abruptly. Much has happened. We were discussing the situation with Rafa Benitez, and I said he's under a lot of pressure. He's now been sacked. Rafa Benitez has now been sacked by Everton within the last hour and a half, 2 hours. Obviously, following on from their defeat to Norwich yesterday, 2-1. The board have taken the decision midway through the transfer window to go. We are parting ways with Rafa. That's 7 managers since 2013 that Everton have had in charge. And of course, I remember back when they sacked Ronald Koeman and the mess that took place in finding a replacement, which ended up being Sam Allardyce, of course, at the time. And then they've had, Silva, and they've had, Ancelotti, and now we've ended up, obviously, with Benitez, and obviously before that we had Martinez as well. So they've gone through a lot of managers since David Moyes left to take over Man United back in 2013. And that's just over a manager a season. Good afternoon, good evening. We had a live stream earlier. Obviously, it got cut short. I had an issue to deal with a neighbour who needed a bit of help with some stuff, and it was quite important, so I couldn't obviously get back to what I was doing straight away. So that got cut down abruptly. At the time, Rafa Benitez was still Everton manager, and I was talking about Rafa Benitez being under a lot of pressure in charge of Everton. The problem Everton now have, and good afternoon, Dan, or good evening. The problem that Everton now have is Man United are looking for a manager right now. There's not a lot of available managers not under contract right now to choose from. I mean, you've got Sam Allardyce, you've got Steve Bruce. Not sure Everton fans will be happy with that style of football. However, it is pragmatic and it is defensively sound. And if you look at their win percentages and their relegation fights, they tend to get clubs out of relegation trouble. Tends to being the word. But there's not a lot of available managers right now. A lot of names are getting thrown around. You've got Wayne Rooney at Derby, Graham Potter at Brighton, and Roberto Martinez, former manager several years ago, who's currently the Belgian manager. But of course, he's not been involved with club football for a very long time. And the international managerial side is completely different from the day-to-day grind of being a club manager. Why go back to what hasn't worked before? Because it didn't work before. I missed your live stream earlier. Oh, don't worry about it. We had to cut it short. We had to cut it short because I had an emergency to do with an upstairs neighbour and needed help with some stuff. I got disturbed, which was a bit frustrating. But at the time, Rafa Benitez was still Everton manager, so I think it's kind of a good thing that we're doing an evening live stream. Obviously, Novak Djokovic has now been deported from Australia. That is another talking point. I think England have capitulated in the 5th test against Australia as well. So that's a 4-0 defeat in the Ashes. Not quite a whitewash. Should have been a 5-0 whitewash in reality. So there's some cricketing stories, there's some tennis stories, and of course the big story of Rafa Benitez getting sacked by Everton and where Everton go from here. Of course, as I say, like they've been linked to a lot of managers. However, Man United are also in the hunt for a managerial replacement for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer when Rangnick steps down and becomes, an advisory role at the club. So it's a very interesting debate. Obviously, England have lost. England have lost, badly in the Ashes. I can see Joe Root and Ben Stokes being removed from the leadership positions within the cricketing setup. I can see Silverwood going as coach, and I can see a big sweeping change of the selectors and the structures in place behind the scenes because it's not good enough. On the other breaking stories, the Novak Djokovic situation, that's got a political element to it because there is an upcoming general election in Australia, and the government is under pressure because of overseas nationals who are Australian or overseas Australian residents who may not be Australian nationals but they have residency in Australia getting stuck overseas and not allowed to re-enter Australia, plus restrictions on state lines. That Novak Djokovic story could have massive implications for domestic sport in Australia and international sport such as MotoGP and the F1 and the Superbikes that go to Australia for international events could have a major impact and bearing on those events as well. The next series is the West Indies. Could we do better though? Because we've only won one Test match in the last 13 months, and that to me is just not good enough, in my opinion. For to have the worst international Test year ever, that's a record-breakingly bad year. And Joe Root has got not a great record as England captain for his win-loss ratio. He's lost more than he's won. in individual Test matches. I think there is time for change. I don't think Joe Root was ever the right guy to be England captain. And Ben Stokes, I don't think he's the right guy to be vice captain or a replacement captain. I do believe there needs to be changes done within the captaincy and vice captaincy, the leadership group. I also believe there needs to be changes in the coaching setup and the selectors setup. There needs to be sweeping changes to the structures in place at the ECB with the Test side. Obviously, a lot of emphasis has been put on the one-day side and the T20 side, and the one-day side did win the World Cup, which was the objective. They have done that, hosted the World Cup 3 years ago. But unfortunately, the T20 World Cup was a shambles as well. So even in the shorter formats of the game, things aren't rosy. There's obviously issues within the domestic county game, be it 4-day county cricket, one-day version, and the T20 version as well. We've had the Yorkshire scandal and a bit of a scandal at Essex, sort of linked to the Yorkshire scandal. We've had Yorkshire lose its Test status, so Headingley will not have Test matches for the foreseeable future. That may change. So Darren Goff's gone in there with his coaching assistants that he selected. So he's not available for the England job. I wouldn't say we should always put the red ball cricket first. I think we need to have a balance between the three international formats, absolutely. But I do believe there needs to be a resolution within the county game. I wouldn't say change the division structure, but I would definitely look at improving the quality domestically. The 100, don't want it. I've never been a fan of it. When the ECB came out and said it's not going to make any money for the first 2 years, it's going to make a loss in the first year, it might break even in the second year. That does not sell this format to me. With the amount of money they've invested and going over budget on that investment, even before COVID, they were already had spiraling costs, not good enough. So that's a problem. So I wouldn't say white ball cricket isn't important. What I would say is there needs to be a good, healthy balance, and I think the ECB have got that balance wrong. I think they've been very reactionary in a lot of their decisions over the last 15, 16 years since the domestic TV rights got taken over by Sky for Test cricket and county cricket. I think that's been a blunder. We used to have the county one-day final, T20 final, and the county championship final on free-to-air TV as well. If it wasn't clashing with a Test match, there used to be county cricket on TV. I have watched several one-day finals and semi-finals. We've lost that. The IPL, again, even though it's an overseas competition, was on free-to-air TV. We've lost that as well. So the TV rights is a mess. It hasn't helped grow the game. I think it's actually helped shrink the game. And you ask your average fan in the street, 20 years ago, they could name you the Test side. Now, Stokes, partly because of his off-field indiscretions, Joe Root because he's the captain and has got to be slaughtered in the media after every defeat. Jimmy Anderson, obviously, because he's a record-breaking wicket taker. Possibly Stuart Broad, maybe one of the Curran brothers, because they're quite high-profile, with their father being a high-profile Zimbabwean Test player who came over here to play county cricket, unfortunately passed away over here due to cancer. But, I can't name you the full Test setup. I could back in the day when I was a teenager. Now, no. And that's a problem. So the average fan, the average casual sports fan, the average casual cricket fan wouldn't be able to name you their current starting England 11. Some of the players they may name may have actually retired some time ago. That's how it's lost its place in the public consciousness. But yeah, changes need to happen. How was Ben Stokes? I'm sorry, that's just a joke to me. How he's made Sports Personality of the Year, personally, especially in a side that is misfiring. But that's I've stopped watching Sports Personality many years ago because it's become a popularity contest rather than actually sporting achievement now, because there's been some very good champions in their own field who've not been correctly recognised. I remember James Toseland, World Superbike double champion, didn't even poll in the top 4 that year he was nominated, which I thought was absolutely shocking, considering that at the time he was racing superbikes. It was a much harder, I think, to win at the time, and he barely got a look in. And James Toseland for me is one of the best motorcycle racers this country's ever produced in the modern era. That was a joke to me. Do I think Chelsea will dominate after Pep leaves City and Klopp leaves Liverpool? We don't know when Pep and Klopp are going to leave those clubs. They seem quite happy. Liverpool getting a big win against Brentford today, which is a crucial win for both, a crucial result for both sides, because it means Brentford aren't definitely safely, although they're in a strong position to get to safety. I think that was their first objective this season. Although Brentford have had a very good start to the season, they're in a very strong position. Liverpool back in second. Um, so, they've just got to win their games now. They've got to win every game now. They've just got to treat every game like a Champions League or an FA Cup final. That's a lot of emotion they've got to put into a lot of games. So we'll see how far that can take them. But they can't afford to slip up. Man City have that little bit of buffer, so they can afford to have one or two bad games. Liverpool cannot afford to have another bad game, so they've literally just got to ride the form, wait till Sane and Salah are back, give them a week off after the African Cup of Nations, and then get them back to that side as quick as possible. Um, the Benitez situation is the very interesting one, in my opinion, because in this morning's live stream, he still had a job. Now, I was speculating that he was under a lot of pressure. What I find weird is the timing of this sacking midway through the transfer window. When the director of football was sacked beginning of December, end of November, I think it was about then. That was the time to make a change before the transfer window, get the change in, then get a new manager in, then he can assess the squad and make, the choices he needs to make in the transfer window to improve, strengthen and refresh the squad. Doing it midway through the transfer window after Benitez has just made a couple of signings is madness to me. Those signings haven't been given time to bed in. They obviously had other transfer targets they haven't signed yet. So that's going to put players off signing for a prospective club if there's no manager there. So trying to attract new players to the club, I think that's a bizarre timing. Either do it at the end of the season or do it before the transfer window. They've done it in the middle of the transfer window. So there's that one. Chelsea have got a winnable run now. Yeah, Chelsea do have. I wouldn't say it's necessarily easier, but I would say they, with the squad they've got, they should win a lot of those games and they should close the gap. They've got a very fair, I would say, fair fixture list coming up. But bearing in mind they're in a lot of cup competitions themselves, and that can affect form, injuries, squad depth. Obviously, that good win over Chesterfield at the last weekend has obviously put them in a stronger position going forward in the cup. And I'll look at the fourth round draw again because I do believe there are a lot of potential shocks in there. It could be a very entertaining fourth round. But Chelsea have definitely got a decent run in, but no game is easy. Form can change like that, and a team can go on a run that wasn't going on at this point in the season. So you think it's an easy game, and then when it comes to playing that side, it's a bit more tricky. But they've got a fair run in. I wouldn't say it's the easiest. And of course, fixtures are being postponed all the time. They've got to get those postponed fixtures shoehorned in. They've got cup competitions to worry about as well. So wait and see until we get through the rest of January transfer window, February. Beginning of March would give us a fair reflection of where the top 4, top 5, top 7, the European places are at, because I do believe there's going to be a fair bit of movement in a very congested battle for Champions League and Europa League qualification. The Cricket World Cup I wouldn't say is less important than others because it is still a global sport. It's played across the world. I would say it's growing in importance again. I think the TV rights needs to be better because the other World Cups were on free-to-air TV, impartial or full coverage. That's where cricket, I think, is lacking. And again, that's to do with the TV rights. Even the Rugby League World Cup, when it was in Australia, just over 4 years ago, there were free-to-air games on TV, including the final. So I do believe, yes, cricket has got a problem with the way the TV rights works because the other World Cups that you had mentioned, even the World Championship Ice Hockey is on free sports in part. So again, free-to-air TV. So there is an issue, I think, with the TV rights that the ICC and therefore the ECB as the domestic, governing body in this country have signed, which we only saw the Cricket World Cup final, and that's only because England got to the Cricket World Cup final. If Australia were playing in that World Cup final, I don't think we get the free-to-air coverage of that Cricket World Cup final in the slightest. So, that tells you a lot about the governance of the game and the greed that they have. They chased the greed and it's backfired. Whereas on the FIFA World Cup, the Rugby Union, Rugby League, they've got free-to-air coverage in part or in full because rugby league this time around has got full coverage. In other World Cups, it's been partial. In other next World Cups in France at the time zone, again probably full coverage as well with the BBC or Channel 4 because they've got the Super League rights now. Again, I think the Rugby League World Cup is trying to grow that global brand and also the domestic brand. That's the difference between cricket and the other major team sports that we play in this country is the World Cup coverage. Behind a paywall, not behind a paywall, more accessible. So it sums it up. What makes Chelsea better than compared to Man United? They've had consistent success under the current ownership, whereas Man United under the current ownership, the success has tapered off. And there's many reasons for that. Now, Chelsea have gone through a lot of managers as well, not just a Chelsea thing, but Man United have since Ferguson retired in 2013. So there's been a lot of managerial upheaval and a lack of stability at Man United. But then you've got to look at the structures of the club behind the scenes. Whereas with Chelsea, they expect results with the money they've spent, and they get results. But at the same time with Chelsea, if you just have a weak season, like Conte found out, where he didn't retain the league title, still won the FA Cup, still got the sack with a year to spare on his contract. So, well, with Chelsea, you still get silverware every season, pretty much. There's a few seasons where they don't. It's more short-term managers, but I think the club is set up to have regular changes every 3 to 4 seasons at a max, average on 2 now. The Chelsea squad, the Chelsea structures are used to regular, fresh voice in the dressing room, and they're regularly in the top 4, top 5. Man United got so used to having that singular voice in Ferguson for so long. You look at when the Glazers take over in around 2003, 2004, but at the same time as Abramovich. Chelsea's success has been continuous. Man United's success has slowly tapered off and has eventually gone off a cliff. That has also to do with player development, so youth development, player recruitment, and the transfer market, letting players go, bringing players in. There's a lot to do with it as well. Plus, you've got the behind the scenes non-footballing structures in the management side, the director of football role, and then you've got director of play. There's too many directors of this and that at Man United. So the off-field structures at Man United are not as structured in a pyramid form that they are at Chelsea. Chelsea's very obvious what the structures are. It doesn't want managers in place. There's a very clear structure in recruitment, player development. They've got a production line of youth talent. Admittedly, they maybe produce too much youth talent for their first team to cope with. Man United, you can see the difference with the two owners with the amount of silverware coming into the clubs. There's a difference. That's why I think there's behind the scenes at Chelsea, there is an expectation every season to be competitive. A trophy this season is unacceptable. 3 trophies since Ferguson. If you count the Charity Shield, that makes 4 in 8 years. That's a trophy every 2 years. Chelsea, it's consistent silverware in the same period. A lot more trophies, FA Cups, League Cups, Premier Leagues. I think you've got a couple of Champions Leagues in there. You've got Europa League in there. Man United won Europa League, an FA Cup, I think a League Cup in there. So there's a very contrast and compare difference in the success in the last decade and a half. It's very, very different. Man United's success has become less. Chelsea's success has become more unstable. It doesn't matter if they don't win the league every season. They're always competing and winning silverware more often than not. Man United is more often than not that they don't win silverware in the same time frame. So there has definitely been a change and a power shift, I believe, since the early mid-2000s when both clubs have new ownership come in with the Glazers and Abramovich, and the club structures as well that go with that. Man United's club structures are very confusing. There's a lot of voices behind the scenes and no actual direction in what they want. I mean, Van Gaal, ironically, who won 2 of those trophies, so the most successful manager they had since Ferguson, was sacked because he played a boring style of football. But he got results. Mourinho got sacked because he lost the dressing room. Solskjaer got sacked because the players just stopped responding, so he lost the dressing room. But then you've got to look at the playing groups that both sides have, the core leadership groups, experienced players versus with young players. Chelsea always kept the same leadership core consistently, and then they added players to that leadership core. So you had your Ballacks, you had your Drogbas, you had your Lampards, your John Terrys, and then you added other experienced players who may be a bit younger to that leadership core. kept them in the leadership corps, gave them responsibility with a captaincy like Azpilicueta, for example, kept them there over a significant period of time, always kept adding to that leadership corps, but keeping the same core of players together for a long time, several seasons together. You add the new players into that as they get more experience themselves. Lo and behold, successful side. Man United. What is the leadership core at Man United? I couldn't tell you what. Is Maguire, should he be captain? We've had Pogba as captain. Maguire's injured at the moment. Pogba's not in the side at the moment. There's a leadership void. Fernandes has the captaincy, and Ronaldo has the cap. There's no proper leadership core there. It's just not working with Ronaldo back. It's all over the place. The players aren't responding, I don't think, positively to Ranić's instructions. I don't think he's got the personnel for the style of play he wants to play. They're in the market for a new manager. We know he's an interim, so we know he's not going to be behind on the bench, being the voice post this season. I think that's a mistake to make as well. I think they should have gone for a permanent replacement for Solskjaer. It's a bit of a mess at Man United. But with Chelsea, it doesn't matter who they get in. The structures are already in place for them to, at least be competitive off the bat and develop off the bat. Australia's first-class competition, the Sheffield Shield, only 6 teams. Are there too many? I wouldn't say there's too much county cricket. I think I'm not against the 2-division system. Maybe you should have a 3rd division system. Actually create even more competition. But I do think too much emphasis has gone on the international sides, especially the shorter formats of the game. They've neglected the domestic game, regardless of how it's structured. I do believe TV deal, the putting it behind a paywall, the dropping attendance, it's all linked. It didn't happen overnight. We've had some good test sides since 2005, but the issues have been allowed to manifest themselves with English cricket for a very long time. Australia's cricket, they're a bit more flexible with their players playing in overseas tournaments, such as the IPL and the other T20 competitions, if they want to, earn their money in the shorter formats of the game. So they're a little bit more flexible in that regard. And they actually have a very good grassroots system in Australia when it comes to cricket. Very, very good. It's a sports-mad country. So your winter sports are like AFL, Aussie Rules, the A-League, Rugby Union. Your summer sport is cricket. There you go. Was sacking Rafa this earlier a mistake? I think the timing is weird. I can see the sacking being inevitable at the end of the season. But if I was going to do a sacking, I would do it before the transfer window. So a new manager can come in, make the desired changes he wants in the transfer window. Right now, they have transfer targets. Those players are now going to be going, do I really want to sign a club that hasn't got a manager, that is in a relegation fight? Do top class players want to go there? The answer is no, because a top class player has just left the club to go to a league rival that's doing better than them, basically, in Denia. The timing's a bit off for me. When the director of football was sacked, I think that should have been a sign that get rid of everyone. Again, give Benitez time. They tried to persevere with him. He made some signings literally earlier this week. So that's a bit of a bizarre decision. I think the Norwich game, with Norwich now picking up a few more wins under Dean Smith, and they're starting to turn a corner. And while Everton have a few games in hand around teams around them, but only they've got a load of games in hand, that could prove crucial come the end of the season. Newcastle, they're starting to play better under Eddie Howe. They're not a million miles away from getting out of trouble either. Watford, 1 or 2 wins, they really put the pressure on Everton. If Everton's form continues to snowball like it is and nosedive, they've really tumbled. Since October, the last 2.5 months has been a disaster for Everton. Quite frankly, it's not been a great run of form. That's borne out in the results. 5 league wins all season, 7 wins on the season in all competitions. His lowest win percentage in the Premier League. It's not going well. And you can trace a lot of the issues with Everton. It's more than Benitez. I think Ancelotti leaving was a key sign that he was not happy at that club, because he was on a 3-year contract, and they were playing well under Ancelotti. They were stable, upper mid-table on the edge of Europe. They were in a good, healthy position to kick on this season. And Everton, the club, were more than happy to go, okay, you've met our release clause, on you go. Everton did not make a battle in trying to keep him, and I think Ancelotti, when he realised the club were not going to keep him, back him and say we want to keep you, they were more than happy to let him go to Real Madrid. Big blunder, I believe, on Everton's part to let him go when they did. But then you look at how they dealt with the Ronald Koeman sacking and his replacement. We've had Marco Silva in there. That hasn't worked out. You had Martinez beforehand, hit a sticky patch. He got shown the door. You had the Unsworth. You had Big Sam. There's been a lot of turmoil since David Moyes went to Man United. Now, David Moyes was a long period of time there, very stable manager. Team were very, very consistent under him. They made an FA Cup final. Imagine if they won that FA Cup final, how different the story would be. Quite honestly, it would have been. It hasn't happened for a very, very long time. Not in nearly living memory. There are some fans who obviously remember their second division spell. So it hasn't happened for a long time. And they're in danger of, falling out of the Premier League for the first time in their history. But the issues at Everton are long-standing. They go back to the mid-90s. Was the last time they won silverware was 95. So that's what. God, it's a fair time. 27 years this May since they last won silverware. They last won silverware when the Premier League logo was this. That's 2 rebrandings ago. That's how long it's been. I bought this beanie. I got given this beanie I bought this beanie with my pocket money, right? My birthday money on my sixth. I think was it my 6th or 7th birthday in 1996. Got this beanie. The season before they won the FA Cup. That's how long it's been. So that lack of success, and they've been in relegation battles since they won the FA Cup in 1995. I seem to remember they had some very difficult seasons in the late 90s. They've had some tough seasons. They've not been in this situation for a long time, however. They've been a very, very mid-table team at best. They haven't taken that next step and regularly been a European side. They've slipped out of the European places in the last, since David Moyes left, basically. So they haven't been in Europe regularly since then. Whether they'll be a better manager or a better team, without Benitez, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure because how many managerial changes do you need to find the right guy? I mean, they're chopping and changing almost a manager every season and a half. That's more than Chelsea. That's actually more than Chelsea now on average. Chelsea managers on average now last 2 seasons, whereas Everton is a season and a half. So they've got less managerial stability than Watford and Chelsea, which tells you something. And the clubs around them, I don't know. I mean, yes, they've got a game or 2 in hand on the clubs around them, but that may not be enough because with their form, I don't think it matters right now. I think at the moment, with the way it's going, I think the clubs below them. I do believe Newcastle and Norwich could possibly, because they're playing better and have better form in the last few games, actually overtake them. Watford, I'm not so sure about. Burnley got all these games in hand, so that's an unknown whether they're going to perform in those games in hand and win them, or if it's the fixture congestion is going to destroy Burnley long term. Personally, in my opinion, so I don't know about Burnley in those games in hand. They could prove crucial. So Everton are in a bit of trouble, and doing it midway through the transfer window is a bit of a head scratcher for me because a new guy's got to be appointed, and the names they're throwing up, I'm not so sure. But I think it's the structures at Chelsea. I mean, it's very easy for a new manager to slot in. I think the structures at Everton, much like the structures at Man United, aren't the same as at Chelsea. I think Chelsea have got a very streamlined management kind of behind the scenes structure, and the non-playing side in the scouting department, in the director of football department. I think it's more structured with Chelsea. I know they go through a lot of managers, which is not necessarily a good thing. However, they've been more consistently successful than other clubs in recent years. They've been one of the most consistent sides for the last 15 years. There is no mistake behind that. The structures in place at the club make it easy for a new manager to slot in. Their youth system makes it easy to, bring the youth through. In fact, they've got too much youth, as we found out with their, ending up with their transfer embargo for sort of tweaking the youth rules a little bit. In regards to Um, the Everton situation, they have spent a lot of money. The difference between Chelsea and Everton, for example, is Chelsea has spent a lot of money and been successful with it. Um, I think, I think, and Chelsea won a few trophies before Abramovich came along, but they were nowhere near as dominant and successful as they are now, and competitive as they are now. Let's just make that very, very clear. Um, However, they were always in the top two divisions. They just couldn't. They had financial difficulties off the field, as we are well documented, and they couldn't get that consistent success over a long period of time. Abramovich era comes along, they can now do that. Um, I wouldn't say Brentford are struggling. I think Brentford actually are in a very healthy position for a first season Premier League club. But yeah, Watford are definitely in trouble. I think Norwich and Newcastle, ironically, I think their performances have improved with new managers. Even though Newcastle haven't got that first win under Eddie Howe, the performances are definitely improving. Norwich have definitely improved under Dean Smith. Um, Burnley have got these games in hand. That's why they've got so many games in hand. They've got so few points. But yes, Burnley have struggled this season. That's a debate whether those games in hand actually how crucial. Do Burnley win those games in hand? Because if Burnley win those games in hand, it completely changes the structure of the bottom five. Um, but there's a gap between Everton and the teams above them. Whereas below, that gap is shrinking, whereas the gap above is actually grown a little bit. And Leeds are struggling as well. Let's not forget Leeds are not having a great season from what was expected to kick on. So Leeds are looking vulnerable. Brentford, I think, have got enough to get out of trouble. They're going to be fine. I think with Brentford, it's that bottom six that I think the relegation fodder is going to come from. Norwich have now changed the dynamic. Everyone, when Dean Smith was told, they're done, they're going to get relegated. They're looking more and more likely to survive and do the Great Escape. On Norwich. Newcastle, it's possible they can get out of trouble. I think Everton may actually be in a relegation fight. It may go down to the end of the season. Um, yes, Chelsea. Yeah, you have to look at the success they've had on the ownership. Um, there you go. What advice would I give to an athlete experiencing anxiety before a season? There's always nerves. There's always nerves. Try it. If it's a team sport, just keep it basic to begin with, and work your way into form, work your way into the team structures. Just do the basics right, and then the more complex stuff will follow. If you're an individual athlete, that's a more difficult one. I was never really good at the individual sports. I was better in the team sports because your weaknesses can be covered up by teammates, and your strengths can cover up a teammate's weaknesses, and there's a bit more, togetherness. About a team sport. Whereas an individual sport, where you are just you against a whole team, of a whole race of competitors, for example, in athletics, it's a bit more difficult when you get exposed with weaknesses. So again, just do the basics. Just do the basics. Go through the basic motions. Do your basic skill set. Get that right. Once you've nailed that down, you can sort of play yourself into form or play yourself into confidence. As long as you get the basics right. A few deep breaths as well before going into competition. You want to just go in, splash your face with a bit of water. There's various ways of doing it, but yeah, just do your normal warm up as you would normally do when you're training, and just get your basic skill set right. So if you're a hurdler, just get your hurdling technique right. Um, you can always over practice as well. Over practice can be a thing where you practice too much and then you start to tense up. So I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be the best advice to give, being like a former kind of youth athlete. At school, I wasn't really fussed how I played. To be brutally honest, I just was playing more for the joy of it and the fun of just I enjoy just playing rugby and playing football and playing field hockey and playing cricket. I enjoyed it a lot. It got a lot of my nervous energy out. But everyone's different. Obviously, I've got friends who now play professional sport that I went to school with. So for them, it's a completely different thing. For them, it's a job. So it depends on how you're looking at it. But I was not overly anxious when I was playing at school. I wasn't really overly anxious when I was playing at the local rugby club either. I was doing it as a for more for fun to keep fit. So I wasn't overly critical of my performance. Um, and yeah, I knew I was going to get lumps and bumps and dirty and scraped knees and stuff. So I was fully aware of the collision aspect of the sport, um, the aches and pains afterwards, the aches and pains in training. So I wasn't overly bothered with, I was playing for fun to keep fit, but there were those who were younger who were playing to go up the age groups and to go up the team levels, and there were those who were older players who, again, doing it to keep fit, members of the club wanting to keep, being involved in the club, do their coaching of the youth teams on the Saturday, play on the Sunday. So there was a more of a keep fit aspect with a lot of the players, and a bit of like play with your mates and just have a bit of a social game with a bit of needle to it. And obviously, you want to win, but um, it was a mixed bag, our squad, because we were, you know, the younger players are the ones that, the first and second squad would look to call upon if there were injuries or suspensions, and the other guys were just, playing to keep fit. Because some of them would referee the youth games on a Saturday or coach the youth teams on a Saturday. So it was a mixture of the third, fourth squad. Really, we were there to back up the main team and also just keep fit and squad depth. Basically, it was more keep fit and fun for us. But everyone's different. Every sports fan's different. Every athlete's different. Imagine going down and yeah, that would be a massive concern with the new stadium planning on the horizon. That can still get cancelled, by the way. Um, but the difference is Liverpool are happy to stay at Anfield and develop at Anfield. Everton aren't happy to develop at Goodison for whatever reason. That makes no. They want to go down a different path. And I'm not sure how the fan base feels about necessarily a new facility and moving the team to the dock area of Liverpool. I'm not sure how the fan base, feel about that. So it's. I think there's a divided fan base as well about the direction the team's taking with a proposed new stadium that's been granted provisional approval, not guaranteed to go ahead yet. There could be well done, there could be delays, they could backtrack. So there's provisional approval from the city council, but that can all change. But they've got to survive this season yet. They need to have a direction with a style of play they want to play. They need to, have a direction going forward because Pickford's the England goalkeeper. I can't see an England international playing in the Championship somehow in goal. So Gareth Southgate's going to have some headaches if they do go down because unless other clubs want to sign some of these players, it's worrying for the national setup as well. I watch the swimming when the Olympics is on, but that it when it comes to individual. I love team sports. I hardly follow individual sports. Yeah, I've gone off watching tennis and what I used to love watching golf as well. Golf used to be fun, but again, TV rights taking it off free to air, put it more behind a paywall, and they wonder why less and less people are watching and getting invested when the big majors are on and things like that. So there was a lot of criticism when the free to air golf coverage was reduced. A lot of criticism aimed at the BBC. A lot of criticism about that decision because they used to get really good viewership figures for golf. Do I think the Seattle Kraken will sell hard at the deadline or leave most of the roster be for the first year? They have got cap space, a lot of cap space. Um, yes, they haven't been as good as predicted. They've been a little bit underwhelming this year, but they've basically been a true expansion team. They've been competitive in games. They're not getting blown out all the time, but I think they've got the wrong guy as coach in Hackstall. And their roster may be a little bit on the weak side for this season. However, I do believe they might actually pick up a few free agents. They've got cap space. I can see some teams dropping a cap dump on them, and I can see them being very active during free agency in the summer. I wouldn't say they're necessarily going to be in the market to dismantle that roster. I think they want to add to that roster and be more competitive in the following two seasons and build upon their first year. It's not been a bad season. It's just not been the season that was expected. But then the bar was set so high by the Vegas Golden Knights in their first year that it was a very difficult act to follow. We're back to normality with an expansion team, but I can see them being on the edge of playoffs in a season or two. I think with the cap space they have, I think free agency they're going to be very active, and I can see them being active in the trade before the trade deadline with other teams. Shaking up the roster a little bit. Um, So we'll see what happens. The Evander Kane situation is obviously still ongoing. It's looking very likely he could end up at Edmonton. And with all the dramas that come with Evander Kane, I mean, Jesus Christ, that's almost like a soap opera with the chaos that surrounds Evander Kane and what's happened with him over the last year and a half. But it's dogged him throughout his career in the NHL with Evander Kane since he was drafted by the Atlanta Thrashers, which has now become the Winnipeg Jets. But it was a different organisation. So his entire time in the NHL, Evander Kane has courted controversy and has been a negative influence, I think, in the dressing room. So I'd be very interested to see what happens with Edmonton, with their form sort of deserting them um, um, in recent last month and a half, 2 months. So even before the extended Christmas pause, the Oilers are not looking like they were at the beginning of the season. Their power play numbers, their penalty kill. I mean, Dave Tippett throwing the goaltending under the bus. I don't think that's fair. The team in front has also got a part to play in the whole dynamic. Conor McDavid, everyone lauds Conor McDavid. His two-way game is shocking. His defensive end of the puck, his defensive end of the rink is not good enough. Yeah, great. He scores all these points and assists and goals. Defensively, he's hopeless. He's just a better version of, I don't know, Austin Matthews or Patrick Laine, where he's great going forward, hopeless defensively, and that doesn't help the team. Right, speaking of ice hockey, yes, Canada and the US are sending teams to the Olympics, but it'll be made up of AHL and European based players. So the NHL players are not going. Also, those AHL players on two-way NHL contracts are also not going. Those AHL players that have been called up to the taxi squad will not be going. So I don't see the US and Canadian teams making the medal round, which is a shame. The best players aren't available. But there's also the diplomatic boycott that's ongoing, and other athletes and other sports who are not even winter sports, like the NBA, are now saying we shouldn't go to the Olympics. Um, so there is definitely a debate about this Winter Olympics next month. So there is that. Right. But yeah, I don't know what to expect from this Olympics. There could be a massive COVID outbreak. The restrictions may change. The AHL players face the same restrictions in China if they were to test positive that the NHL players would. So still a lot of risk attached to these squads going over there. We'll have to wait and see how it all pans out. And of course, that diplomatic boycott and calls for more athletes to refuse to go. It's a very politically charged Olympics, and with the backdrop that's happened over the last 2 years, you can see why. What do I expect from Jack Eichel when he comes back? He's been so out of the game. I think he's going to be a bit rusty. He's going to need a conditioning stint in the AHL with the Vegas Golden Knights affiliate. 2 weeks conditioning stint. And it looks like Marchessault may be the player who has to be traded to give way, which is a shame because Smith and Marchessault, Riley Smith, I think, been a great pickup from Florida when they came, and they've been an integral part of the team. So an integral part of the team has to be moved on to get Jack Eichel in. What do I expect? I expect him to be hungry, motivated, and he doesn't have to be the main man. He doesn't have to be the main man at Buffalo. The pressure is reduced in Vegas because the fans just love the players who play for the team, even former players. So I think there is that. Who is Reed Boucher? Let's have a look at Reed Boucher because I've heard a fair bit about Reed Boucher. How drunk was the judge? Oh God, let's have a look at Reed Boucher because there are things to discuss here. Hang on a sec. Oh, the noise in the background is my washing machine because I'm trying to do two things at once. Let's have a look at Reed Boucher. Let's have a look and see what he's done. Jesus. Oh dear. Well, he's currently playing in the KHL. So let's have a look at what's going on with. That seems to be a culture issue. I always say this about, like Adam Johnson and Benjamin Mendy with Man City. Well, they weren't playing there at the same time. Again, a culture like Carl Walker. Reed Boucher is an American born player, currently playing for Lokomotiv Yaroslavl in the KHL. He was selected 99th overall by the Devils in 2011. He's previously played for the Devils, the Predators, and the Canucks. Right, let's have a. Here we go. In January, he pleaded guilty to an offence back in 2011. He pled guilty. It doesn't say what. It doesn't say anything about his sentence in that article. However, let's have a look. Well, he pled guilty yesterday, so that is an interesting subplot. He was charged with first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 25 to life. Dear, and he was living with a billet family. That's even worse. He pleaded to a lesser degree of a third-degree criminal charge. I don't know how. This is why I find that the US legal system different to what we have over here in Europe with murder, attempted murder, and the sentencing guidelines that come with it, because our legal system obviously is different. So he pleads guilty to a lower charge. Whoa. According to the Detroit Free Press, the judge agreed to let Boucher enter a plea for the lesser charge and agreed to sentence him with no upfront jail time. Through the Holmes Youthful Trainee Act, or HYTA. Under the HYTA, the case will not appear on his public record if he successfully completes his sentence. So he has to go through a training program. I've already got that. It's called the history buff, and I just throw politics in there. Right. Oh God. Apparently, the US hockey, because it was through the US system, was contacted about the incident in 2011, but all it did was remove him from the billet and put him in a new one. So I think there's a lot of pressure now coming back on, ice hockey for failures back in a decade ago. Same with the Chicago Blackhawks, which was happening at the same time. So they were aware of the allegations, much like the Chicago Blackhawks were, and all they did was move them out of sight, out of mind. Back in March 2011, they spoke to parents of both himself and the girl, and no accusations were made at the time. But he was proactively removed from the billet home. In fast forward a decade, they were again notified by police of allegations of misconduct, and they have fully cooperated. Lou Lamoriello, who was at the helm when New Jersey used a fourth-round pick to draft him, claims they did not know about this incident, and they would not have drafted him had they been aware of the incident. Now, Lou Lamoriello strikes me as the type of person who probably would have stood up for the organisation if they were aware of such things. So I do believe that the US hockey system, US hockey, has actually failed this girl, and actually failed ice hockey in general, because he's ended up making money over the last decade out of a professional career. He's back in court at the end of the month, so obviously his time with Yaroslav is coming to an end prematurely. But yeah, that's Leipzig for Tannen, Boucher, Evander Kane. That says to Voinov, oh God, Voinov, he hasn't played since he battered his wife. It says to me that there is a culture within Vancouver as a hockey city. I'm not saying the team necessarily, but the hockey city. But bearing in mind all these players, Vatanen and Leipzig wasn't at Vancouver at the time. He did his things at the Capitals, being a pain in the ass. Vatanen was. Boucher and Kane weren't. They were obviously not. I don't think Kane's ever played for the Canucks. But Voinov, LA Kings, they weren't in the organisation at the time, but they are from the Vancouver area. I've had links to the Vancouver area, which says to me that the culture within hockey in general at that time, I think now it has massively improved, but at that time, that's a shocking It's because of his age at the time of the incident, because technically he was a minor as well. Therefore, you know, legally speaking, I'm not an expert on US law. That's the problem. Um, but it doesn't look good for the US legal system. And this has been replicated across the US legal system because, and this is again another scandal involving the NHL, US hockey, just US sport in general when it comes to looking after not only their athletes but families as well. Following on from the gymnastics scandal, amongst other scandals that professional and Olympic sport in the US has had. A lot of it stems back to about a decade to 2 decades ago. There's a period of time where clearly were going wrong. And you fast forward 10, 15 years, it all comes out. And I think there's definitely, I think he's done. I think his career's over. We had a similar incident over here in the UK with a player playing for Sheffield, who was convicted, I think, a couple of years ago. So clearly, there's a culture issue, which I don't think exists now as much. I think there's still an issue of machoism and lad culture and the pros and cons with that. Um, but there seems to be an entitlement culture, a lack of really living in the real world. Like, it's not just the Boucher situation or Battanin situation or even Kane with the Chicago Blackhawks with his allegations in Buffalo when he was on holiday, and of course the taxi cab allegations where he assaulted a cab driver. Um, there are some concerning. There's always been the rumor mill, and there's always a fair bit of truth to some of the allegations and rumors that go around. I mean, there seems to be a drug culture, an alcohol culture, has claimed lives. There's players who commit suicide, so clearly there is a culture where players who are struggling, um, you know, don't feel comfortable to have that voice to talk to someone. Say, "Look, I'm struggling with my mental health, or I'm struggling with addiction." There's also what happened at the Blackhawks, and players knew what happened. Chet Evans was later found not guilty at a retrial, and his co-defendant was found not guilty at the original trial. So there was clearly evidence issues, and there wasn't, and that's difficult because his career had resumed. But Adam Johnson is the one I would think would definitely be the highlight of. There's been other players as well. Robinho's been found guilty as well of sexual misconduct. So Benjamin Mendy is cooked. He's going to prison. Well, he's already in prison. Tells you what you need to know about the difference between Chet Evans, who was not remanded in jail, and Benjamin Mendy, who is the severity of what Benjamin Mendy is alleged to have done. Then you've got the unnamed Sale Sharks rugby union player who was arrested at the beginning of the weekend, earlier this week. And there's speculation over the identity of said player. And Danny Cipriani and his wife, unfortunately, have been harassed by the media because someone has leaked the age of the player and the age of the woman who's also been arrested, who's older than the player, into the media public domain, which it shouldn't have been leaked. And so speculation is going between three players that I will not name on this channel for legal reasons, because that's libel. But there are three English players under suspicion who fit the age of the player in question at Sale Sharks, and have all of them had at least one cap for England. And now Eddie Jones and the England squad, England coaching centre, have been made aware that a player who is eligible for selection. Why? So there's definitely, professional sport has this negative kind of entitlement superiority complex. They're above the law, or it doesn't apply to them. And there's definitely a certain arrogance that comes across, and they don't cover themselves in glory. And it's not just ice hockey or football, soccer, if you're North American, or rugby union, or rugby leagues have this as well. Jared Hayne, amongst others. We've had the Jack DeBellin scandal in the NRL, and of course he was eventually found not guilty after a lengthy legal process that lasted about 3 years. We've had Barbecue Gate involving Jack DeBellin, amongst others. So the professional sport, they don't help themselves. We had the Ben Cousins issues with his mental and physical health and his drug problems over many years in the AFL, as the main AFL scandal. I mean, we've had, Ben Roethlisberger being accused of stuff in the NFL. We had the Minnesota Vikings party boat scandal. Um, there's been domestic violence allegations against a whole host of players, and Slava Voinov obviously was found guilty in a court of battering his wife. Hasn't played in the league since, even though he's finished his sentence, done his community service. He's still banned by the NHL. So what I find interesting is Evander Kane with all his off ice dramas, why any team would want to sign such baggage to their organisation, considering what's happened at San Jose, what happened at Buffalo, what happened at Winnipeg and Atlanta with how well, socially aware. It's called having common sense and living in the real world. And a lot of these high profile, majority men, but of course you got Hope Solo. She was done for child abuse. She battered her nephew. Um, Obviously quite high profile in the US media. Um, there's been some high profile female athletes who've also had negative headlines and scandal and all sorts, just not as many, but it's predominantly male athletes. A lot of them burst on the scene very, very young. They're under a lot of pressure. They're given a lot of money, and they're not really given a lot of guidance with these massive contracts they sign. And people wonder then why they run off the rails. Well, they're in the media spotlight from 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. They're given these massive contracts, sometimes more than they could hope to earn in a year doing my job a week. The average salary for an 18, 19-year-old Premier League football player is what I earn in a year. They earn that in a week at some of these big clubs when they get their first proper big contract when they're about 21, 22. They're earning my annual salary in a week. So they get big salaries very, very young. They're not necessarily advised in the best way what to do. They're very mollycoddled in the fact, oh, my boots are broken. Member of staff gets a new pair of boots to their custom specification. They're not socially aware because they're not living in the real, and they've been in the academy system, or they've been talent spotted very, very young. So they're always being sort of guided. You're going to be a professional athlete. You're going to be a professional athlete. They've not really lived in the real world. Soccer is actually the upper class word for it in this country. Back in the Victorian era, it was actually called soccer, as upper class colloquial speak, because it's called association football because you've got rugby union football and rugby league football as well, and then you've got Gaelic amateur association football, and then you've got Aussie rules football, and soccer sort of was an upper class way of saying football. Soccer. Oh, my wash machine's making some horrible noises because the drum isn't straight, so I've got to sort of wash machine. But the origins behind it is an upper class word to distinguish it from the various footballing codes. And I've done a video on all the footballing codes because North American football, be it Canadian or NFL, because they're different. You've got Aussie rules, as I say. You've got Gaelic football, association football, rugby league, rugby union. Touch. Soccer is literally just an English upper class word from the Victorian era that the Americans adopted because they had American football to distinguish it between American football and association football. It was just a shorter word. It was easier. Soccer, bang, there you go, done. But the Victorian English upper class and upper middle class would call it soccer to distinguish it from rugby union, which was actually called RFU, Rugby Football Union, and the Rugby Football League, which is rugby league, have also got football in the name. And then, of course, you've got Gaelic football, which is an amateur sport in Ireland, which is very similar to AFL, which is Australian Football League or Aussie rules. So there's many codes of football or many footballing sports that all have a generic same origin, and they've spawned. That's why my playlist is football soccer, because I've got European fans who call it football, and then North American, Australian fans who will call it soccer. So, but you've got the different footballing codes, and I've done a video on it discussing how many different footballing codes there are or sports, and there's about 9 I can think of. About 9, and you could add futsal to that as well as a indoor football side. But that's the origins behind it. It's actually a Victorian upper class colloquial word to distinguish it from rugby union and rugby league, because it was a working class sport. and it was a university kind of thing as well, where have your university clubs where you have billiards club and the rowing club and the soccer club here, because university teams actually used to play in the FA Cup originally. I think one of the first winners of the FA Cup was a university team. So there you go. But that's sort of where it comes from. A lot of people think there's different origins of the word. From a lot of the sources I've read, the origin of the word is Victorian upper class word for association football. Because you sock the ball with your foot, don't you? You really give it a good socking, which is a good leathering, basically. Um, so yeah, it's basically just Victorian slang used by the upper class to describe the sport. Because you put your socks on your feet and you play the foot, you play it with your feet and you give it a good socking, eh? Whereas rugby, to distinguish it, is mostly based with the hands and occasionally you kick the ball. So there you go. The irony of calling rugby football union and rugby football league uh, when you're playing majority of the game with your hands is a bit confusing. Same with American football. Again, mostly played with the hands. Are there any NHL contenders in the need to trade for Craig Anderson and Carol Bielkma as backups? I think with the taxi squad now, you've got to carry 3 goaltenders, so that sort of covers that. And I think they'll carry the taxi. I mean, even in the playoffs anyway, you always carry 3 goaltenders. But because the NHL brought in the taxi squad rules post the resumption of play, so they can actually get games played when there's outbreaks of COVID and stuff, I don't think there's going to be. I think the trade deadline's going to be quite quiet. I think with the call ups of the third goalies to the taxi squad, you're going to see a lot of them get game time. So I think Craig Anderson is possibly not going to have a playoff run. I think he's going to retire at the end of the year. Uh, the Elkma, I think he's going to stay put. If I'm honest, um, again you've got that taxi squad as well. There are some other players floating around who are having conditioning stints. We may see some movement, but there's a lot of teams really close to the cap. There's very few teams with cap space. So if if there's going to be any trades, there's going to be more players going one way than the other. And I can see it being more of a quiet trade deadline this year. I think the COVID pandemic, teams been close to the cap, very few teams with cap space. I don't know. I haven't watched hockey for a couple of weeks. I've given it a bit of a break since the resumption of play. I've only watched 1 or 2 games. I've not really been overly focused on it the last couple of weeks since they resumed play. I've not been actually very well for beginning of the year. I was a bit under the weather. I think I had the Omicron variant, but I could still battle through it. I've had both my jabs, but um, I haven't really had a lot of the energy required to sit and watch loads of hockey. Um, I've been very, very busy and I'm not 100%. So I've really been work, sleep, work, sleep. I've had a lot of stress outside of work. But no, it's an interesting question. I think that there will be some trades, but Arizona and Seattle are the 2 teams that scream cap space. Most of the league doesn't have cap space. So there could be some trades. I can't see it being as busy as other trade deadlines. Um, and with Jack Eichel coming back on and Marchessault being available, I can see some movement there. Um, Whether Marchessault goes as a rental and then gets re-signed by Vegas in the offseason could be interesting because I don't think Vegas want to lose a key player like Marchessault, but he seems the likely candidate to be moved. I don't know. I think most teams that are in and around the playoff hunt are pretty settled with their goalkeeping tandems. I think Edmonton are the ones in most need of something, and they're going after Evander Kane. So how much cap space does that leave them? It's going to be interesting, but I think Edmonton, if you're talking about a team that wants to make the playoffs, they could be playing themselves out of the playoff space. So, and if they are going after Evander Kane, that doesn't leave them a lot of space to work with the rest of the player market and the trade market. So that's an interesting question and an interesting theory about what could happen. But I would say let's see what happens into February. Let's see how busy the trade market gets. Let's see if it heats up. We haven't seen loads of trades this season, and I do think because teams are so close to the cap, those teams with cap space are going to ask for more pieces in return to give up a major player, and I can't see some teams willing to upset the team chemistry that they have. Some teams are in good form post the resumption, other teams are not in good form post resumption, like Edmonton. Winnipeg, for example, okay, we had a bad defeat to Colorado. We were playing an AHL team basically because of a COVID outbreak, and then we win the following game with like three or four of the players are between them had about 9 games NHL experience, and we won a game. So, and since the coaching change in Winnipeg, we've got a better record than before, as in win-loss ratio. So Edmonton are playing themselves out of form. Winnipeg are playing themselves into form. Their team's on the cusp of the playoff line. If we go by win percentage, if the season's stopped now, we're in the playoffs. It throws the whole thing up in the air. The only team not in the only team guaranteed to definitely not be in the playoffs is Arizona, and even then, they're not having the worst seasonal record. I think Washington have got that safe, and the expansion Ottawa Senators have got that safe as the 2 worst seasons on record. Arizona aren't that bad; they do occasionally win games, but Edmonton not looking good. Could a few players be picked up by NHL teams because? Well, now this is the interesting thing, because they had that extended break and then they pulled out the Winter Olympics. They're going to try and reschedule games for what would have been the Olympic break. It does change things. It's going to be interesting how they all fixture the remaining fixtures and games to be played, how they refix those games that have been cancelled because of COVID. But every major sports league is now facing this conundrum in the Northern Hemisphere. It doesn't matter if it's the NHL, the NBA, European football, European rugby, the NRL and the AFL in Australia. They're going to be starting there. They're actually now in the process of their pre-seasons. They've already had disrupted pre-seasons because of COVID outbreaks on teams. The Super League Rugby League is starting up in a month's time. There's a lot of conjecture about the financial state of the Super League right now. It's going to be interesting. The trade deadline, though, happens not. That's going to be a difficult one. I think NHL teams will look at the Winter Olympics and possibly make signings in the summer in free agency if players are free agents and therefore got a good agent talking to teams in North America if they're a European-based player. Some of the players there will be draft eligible or already have been drafted, so they could be traded. So the Winter Olympics is always a good advertising window. Same with the World Championships, which will happen in May. They're good advertising windows. That's where players put themselves in the shop window for potential recruitment opportunities, a chance to shine on the international stage, could get eyes, scouts looking at players. But yeah, absolutely. I think there are players playing at the Olympics who will play in the AHL, the KHL, the European leagues, definitely putting themselves in the shop window. But it's a very limited number of nations at the Olympics. There's some good players who are not at the Olympics who'll be playing at the World Championships, for example. So it's an opportunity to highlight your skill set and what you are, capable of doing. And absolutely, I mean, I think that's what Liam Kirk got his AHL shot this year, is because his performance at the World Championship last year. Then he got the knee injury, but it is definitely a chance to put a player in the shop window. Same with the World Cup and the Euros. There are players that earned moves to other clubs because of what they showed in international competition. Same in rugby union. It'll be the same in rugby league this winter. Players we put themselves in the shop window for 2023, especially as there is expansion with the Dolphins joining the NRL in 2023. Players we put themselves in the shop window for a contract, be it for an expansion side, or because there's player movement, a lot of player movement happening to get a new contract at a new club, be it in the Super League or in the NRL. Yeah, but we're in the World Championships, and so therefore that's a good thing as well. It's the second biggest ice hockey tournament there is after the Olympics. It's the World Championships. There's a debate whether we'll have a World Cup of hockey and a sort of return to the World Cup of hockey format. I hope it's different. That's been debated, and of course, NHL players not going. NHL players wanting to play for their country. They get the opportunity at the World Championships, but they miss out on the Olympics. It's part of the CBA. So there's been a lot of discussions, but the NHLPA were fully backing the decision not to go in the end because of the logistical nightmare if a player tests positive, how long they're going to spend in quarantine, not only in China but also returning to Canada and the US. But yes, absolutely, there's a big chance for a player to get exposure, but it's a different style of hockey as well to the North American leagues. It's a different size ice surface. It's a different style of play. It's more skill based. So you're not looking for a grit player coming out the Olympics. That's where you want to scout. International hockey is where you want to scout your skill players, your creative players, your defenders, defensemen who are very defensively minded, very structured. So you want to scout your goaltenders. Um, that's sort of where you want to. You don't those power forwards don't necessarily get a shot at the Olympics or the World Championships necessarily. They sometimes do. Depends on their goal to game ratio and their points ratio and what they can produce. You know, taking them out of the team environment, the club environment, into the international environment. It's more your skill-based players that end up going to the World Championships and then the Olympics. Um, so your hard-nosed, gritty players, those fourth liners who throw the gloves down and make the big hits, and they shut down plays, for example, don't necessarily go to those kind of tournaments. But if you're looking for a skilled player or a two-way centre, you've got a great window to look in what you can possibly sign or trade for in the off season in the summer. That's when you put yourself in the shop window. Absolutely. Well, yes, it is a shame that we didn't qualify for the Olympics, but we are in the World Championships, which is something we want to solidify our position there and take that next step. Of course, Liam Kirk with his knee injury, that's a big blow for the side. Whether he'll be fit enough to play at the World Championships, we'll wait and see on his recovery from his knee surgery. But he shut down for the rest of the season, which is a massive shame because he was developing really well at the Roadrunners in the AHL. So that's a big loss for Great Britain is Liam Kirk's injury, whether he'll be fit enough to play at the World Championships and have that impact he had last year. But it's nice to talk about things other than football. And, you know, obviously we could speculate who's going to replace Rafa Benitez at Everton, much like we can speculate who's going to be Ranić's permanent replacement at Man United when he steps aside to become into an advisory role. But I can see Man United struggling for the rest of the season. I can't see them. There's a lot of disunity in that dressing room, lack of morale for whatever reason. And before Ronaldo joined the club, they finished second last year. So Man United have really not kicked on this season. But yeah, Olympic participation, doesn't matter if it's ice hockey or the other sports, there's growing calls for athletes to boycott. We've got the diplomatic boycott that's in place with several countries signing up to a diplomatic boycott. And then with what's happening with COVID, both in here and overseas, there's a lot of question marks if an athlete tests positive. And then you've got the Djokovic situation in tennis, and it just really sums up the situation. Yeah, I hope we have a good World Championships. We're showing a lot of progress and development. We're taking the right steps in the right direction. That's got to be noted. The sport has grown massively in the UK in the last decade or so, even with all the COVID situation and arena issues that teams have faced and teams folding. There has been massive growth domestically, and we have seen talent play overseas outside the UK. And now Liam Kirk is leading that charge, and there are other players on the NHL radar that are developing in the elite league. So absolutely, we could see more players drafted by the NHL in the next couple of years, which will be a massive shot in the arm, I think, the game domestically. Absolutely. But even so, we had a very good World Championships this year. We played better. Our under-20s had a very good bronze medal finish, I think, in their Group A2, I think. So we're like the third tier of the under-20s. They had a very good performance in their World Junior kind of competition they were playing in at their level. And we had some good performances there. I think it was Lithuania we were playing in. So the players coming through are showing great promise and development as well. So it's not just the main senior side; it's also the side that the players coming through are showing great development and great growth, which can only be a positive. My washing machine worries me, constantly worries me, but just got to wash my work uniform and hang that up. But yeah, there's been some real positive development signs from the younger players as well that will also be coming up on the radar of scouts at teams. There is no doubt in my mind, some British players should be playing at a high level. It does look a tough one, but it also depends what players are available from the NHL teams as well. It does honestly depend what teams make the playoffs, how big the playoff format is, if the playoff format is disrupted in the NHL. The COVID restrictions the host nation has in place, for example, the quarantine period, how many players are released by their teams. There's a lot of unknowns at this point in regards to will the championships take place? Will they be disrupted by the pandemic? Um, there's still anything can happen in the next 4 or 5 months. It really can. It's not a given that everything's going to go smoothly at this point. We saw what happened with the World Juniors getting cancelled partway through. So and how that was handled by Canada. So a lot can happen between now and then. There's a lot of uncertainty between now and then. So watch this space on that. Regardless of how tough the group looks, a lot can happen between now and then. So don't mark it permanently in your diary just yet. We are still too far out, I think, to make comment on what the situation could be in May. A lot can happen between now and May. I'm just going to say that on the record with what happened with the World Junior Championship in Canada last month, with how that basically became farcical and got cancelled midway through. So again, as I say, a lot can happen between now and May. Injuries, suspensions, retirements. Players could retire and go, "I'm done." A lot, as I say, a lot can happen in the following months. So I wouldn't necessarily fully pencil it in your diary that it's definitely going to happen and there's not going to be disruption to it. But yeah, it does look like a tough group, but that's not insurmountable. With what we did last year, we proved we were better than the previous tournament, 2019. So we have taken that next step, and there are players. We don't know what squad was going to be announced, who's going to be in the side. As I say, injuries, suspensions, and a whole host of other issues could crop up between now and May. So, but the growth that the national setup has taken and gone forward year on year is there for all to see with where we've come from to where we are. So definitely, in my opinion, we are in a much stronger position now than what we were in beginning going into the 2019 tournament. So, and the players have got that big tournament experience now. The domestic game is massively improved from what it was a decade ago. The player depth is much bigger than what it was a decade ago. They're fitter, they're more skillful. More players are, getting, good game time, taking that next step. So I think we are in a strong position to be competitive and be, a solid outfit. Um, and of course, there's games we're going to target, and we just don't know what the opposition are going to name as a squad. It all depends on how the playoffs go, how disrupted the other European leagues are as well with the COVID pandemic and disruptions there, what the host nation has in place for COVID protocols, and whether the tournament actually takes place yet, because a lot can happen between now and obviously May. So, while the group looks tough, a lot can happen. Again, as I say, between now and May, from week to week, looking at games that are getting postponed in various sports because of the pandemic. I mean, the fact that the NHL had to bring back in the taxi squad, which they should have had in place from the beginning of the season anyway, it's a very reactive decision. So, yeah, I think it does. I think with the situation cricket finds itself in, and we discussed this in regards to the World Cup coverage, and only one game being on free to air TV 2 years ago, which was the final. If we didn't make the final, it's not on free to air TV, making that very, very clear. With the situation cricket finds itself in with its current TV rights deal, a shocking Ashes series, a disappointing T20 World Cup as well. We didn't do as well as expected considering we won the one-day format. Cricket's in a bit of a mess. So yes, absolutely, it has a chance to leapfrog cricket with growing attendances, growing player depth, more youth talent, more kids wanting to play the game. I mean, look, I'm wearing NHL gear right now, so growing fan base, growing TV figures, be it on Free Sports or Premier Sports, um, improving international setup. Absolutely has the opportunity to continue to grow. I don't think it overtakes cricket just yet, or rugby league for that matter, which are far more established, better structures in place, more history to the games, and more history with a professional setup. However, rugby league and cricket are, in my opinion, struggling financially and in crisis. There is debates over the TV deals in place. I mean, rugby league is now Channel 4 stepping in, showing a limited number of regular season and playoff games. The World Cup being delayed by a year, I think, has had a massive negative impact financially on the game right now. I mean, I watched a little bit of a Challenge Cup first round game between, what was the name of the team? And the British Army fielded a team. The British Navy were into the second. The British Army were playing a local amateur side, and it's great to see that on the streaming services, the free streaming service like BBC iPlayer, but it wasn't on free to air TV. So you had to look to see if it was on. Um, and there are issues with the Super League and the RFL having two different governing bodies and splitting the governance of the game, having to get emergency loans from the government to sustain themselves. Um, teams financially struggling. Some teams going to part-time status or reducing the numbers of full-time professionals on their books. So there are concerns with rugby league going forward. Cricket, the scandal in the build-up to the Ashes. The shocking. Okay, we could say the warm-up games were affected by the weather. Australia had the same warm-up games and couldn't, get a full warm-up game played. They also entered the Ashes on the backdrop of scandal in regards to their captaincy being forced to change. Still, I think, dealing with the scandal in regards to the ball tampering scandal. Not a great Australian side. Very average Australian side, if we're being honest. If you play them against India or South Africa, they get beaten. Or New Zealand, they get beaten. I think BT are losing a lot of their rights, and Sky have been on the back foot in the last couple of years with the Premier League free pay per view debacle. Obviously we saw free to air Premier League games that had record viewership figures that haven't been replicated on Sky since for viewership numbers. BT losing the FA Cup rights to ITV and BBC sharing them. So there is definitely a bit of a shift with Channel 4 picking up Super League rights, shared Super League rights. There's definitely a shift. And I think cricket, okay, yeah, they had a couple of T20 and one day matches on in the summer for the first time since 2005, which was great. It was great. They weren't the best cricket to watch, England Sri Lanka, but it was positive that we had some free to air coverage of the shorter formats of the game. But I can definitely see a shift now in what the public want. And if the ECB are smart when it comes to the next TV rights agreement, I can see Test cricket coming back on free to air. If not Test cricket, at least the one day and T20 series that accompany a Test tour domestically. So the away team coming in, let's say it's Pakistan or Bangladesh or India or South Africa or the West Indies. If we've got a touring team coming here like they did in the summer with Sri Lanka, I can see the shorter formats being easier for TV because they are. The one days and the T20s getting free to air broadcasts and more of them. I can see there being a shift in thinking because I don't think the 100 was as successful as even the ECB hoped. And half the households in the UK don't have Sky or BT Sport, either for financial reasons or they just don't want to have that financial outlay, or they never have. So already they're missing out on a huge swathe of the population. And what we're seeing with younger people is we are turning off. The average Sky Sports customer is in their 40s. The average fan going to games of professional sport is in their 40s. So there's definitely a shift with younger people not wanting to pay for subscription sport. there was a lot of backlash about Amazon getting the autumn internationals for rugby union, but the women's autumn internationals were on free-to-air TV and streaming services that were free, and I watched many of them, and I was quite impressed with the coverage, if I'm honest. I can see a little bit of a shift more to free-to-air coverage. It's coming back now. Things like MotoGP, Superbikes, the F1, the World Rally Championship, they're behind a paywall now. That wasn't the case 20 years ago, but that's happened with motorsport. British Touring Cars is on free-to-air TV and has been for 20 odd years, which is fantastic. And their support series, which is fantastic. I've also found streaming for the Le Mans, the European, the World, and the American Endurance Championships, the American Trans Am Championships. Guess what? They're all free to air on YouTube. They're all free streaming services on YouTube. You can watch them live and free on YouTube. So there is a shift, and I think certain sports have realised we might want to have a YouTube stream here. And if you do miss the match, you can rewatch the full coverage with the little ads popping up, but you don't have to pay for YouTube Premium. So some of these motorsports, Australian ice hockey, for example, the NRL has got its own streaming service, NRL.com. For those who live outside Australia and New Zealand, I mean, you pay like a monthly fee, like £12.50 or 130 quid a year, but they've got that website. There is a shift away from putting a paywall on TV in the way. It's cheaper for me to get the NRL website than pay for Sky TV and not being able to watch every single NRL game. I can watch every single NRL game plus all the related TV programs with it for a fraction of the price. For a yearly fee, that would be a monthly fee for Sky Sports. So there is a power shift within how we consume the media, but also there is a definite power shift. I can definitely see happening and a trend away purely from the majority of sport being behind that paywall. There's been a huge debate about it in Parliament. That I think that's enshrined in law because it's classed they grade it a category A kind of things. And a fair bit of horse racing is on free to air TV anyway, on ITV. So horse racing, well, it's not everyone's cup of tea. If you do like, your national hunt, I prefer my national hunt over flat. I don't particularly, not a big fan of flat racing. The horses get treated differently. They're pumped with a lot of steroids, a lot of strong pain. The jump horses are treated far better. But there is definitely, in my opinion, because horse racing is so reliant on advertising and so reliant on people going to racetracks and gambling, it has to be on free to air TV. A fair proportion it does, otherwise it dies. But a lot of motorsports have gone behind a paywall, which I think is 50-50 with that one. But you have to ask the question with MotoGP and F1 and the World Superbikes and World Rally Championship, why that's the case. Because 20 years ago, in the 90s, that was the peak of motorsport, in my personal opinion. You could watch so much motorsport free to air TV, being it highlights or full race packages, live broadcasts. That has completely flipped. And I don't think it's benefited motorsport. Now, you could argue some of the international series and overseas series have gone, actually, to reach a wider audience, we'll put it on YouTube, for example, or we'll put it on a streaming website, which is a lot cheaper than your Sky TV, your BT, your big paywall, broadcasters. Guess what? Getting viewers. People are interested. They're actually getting accessibility that they didn't have before. So if you want to watch endurance GT racing and prototype like Le Mans, you can watch it on a free stream online on YouTube. You can watch the full 24-hour Le Mans on YouTube. You don't have to watch it on Sky, or I think it's Premier Sports or whatever it may be, or Motorsport TV. You can watch it full on YouTube. And if you miss it, you can rewatch it on YouTube at your own leisure. So you can, I think the Le Mans last year they broke it into 4 parts. You can break it into 4 equal segments. So you can watch it over 4 days rather than the whole 24 hours in one go. Or you can watch it all in one go and drink copious amounts of caffeine and have loads of Pro Plus and wire yourself for 2 days. But this is the thing. A lot of sports have realised We have this tool, social media, and it's accessible to the whole world. And we'll whack it on there. So the World Endurance Championship, the European Endurance Championship, the IMSA, which is the North American, endurance championships. You've got the Trans Am Championship, watch all those races online as well, and you can watch them for free on YouTube. So there is that option out there, and a lot of sports are realizing we need to have a YouTube stream, even if it's for our highlights, full match replays. The option is there. That's me washing done, so I'm gonna have to call this a stream in a bit. But Sky and BT, with the amount of people illegally streaming as well, and getting dodgy TV sticks and dodgy TV boxes, the amount of money in legal costs to try and shut down these VPNs and all that, and stop people from illegally streaming. It's not the pay-per-view boxing. You're already paying for a subscription paywall, and on top of that, you've got to pay for another subscription. That is a very flawed business model because you've got to pay for it twice. And then the TV companies wonder why boxing fans or UFC fans or Bellator fans or whatever sport fans decide to illegally stream. It's a no-brainer. Either it's too expensive, which it is, and when you put a second paywall in front of a paywall, it really is a head scratcher. But it's a flawed business model that the black market undercuts, and I think Sky and BT have realised that. And more people, I think Anthony Joshua's fight, I can't remember who it was against. It was before Ruiz Jr. More people illegally streamed that fight, illegally watched it on illegal streams, be it free or legal pay-per-view streams for cheaper than actually paid for the Sky pay-per-view. It was worked out, I think 80% of people who watched that fight illegally streamed it or found ways of watching it using VPNs or whatever to get even if it was in foreign commentary, just to watch the fight. 80% of people in this country did not watch it through the legitimate channels of the pay-per-view on Sky or BT. I can't remember which one it was, but 80% of people watched it on a different platform or using a VPN online to get round the paywall that was in place. So I think Sky and BT are starting to realise they're losing a bit of the battle, and they are losing subscribers. A lot of people in the last 18 months have cancelled their subscriptions. With the way the TV companies acted when COVID shut down sport, a lot of people went, "I'm not paying for this. I'm not renewing," not because there was no sport on, but the way the TV companies demanded their money back because, oh wait, you're in breach of contract. Well, actually, there's a pandemic going on, so everyone's getting affected. And the TV companies were like, "We want a rebate. We want money back. We're not happy." It caused the TV deal in France to collapse. It caused the TV deal in Germany to lose like 25% of its value. So it has had an impact on the rights and all that. And of course, they had to talk about something. Even the NRL, they had 8 weeks where they were, having they put on chat shows and they put on documentaries rather than have no programming. They went, okay, we'll show the classic matches of yesteryear. We'll find archive documentary footage. We'll find archive interview footage, like full on edited interviews with all the swear words, and we'll find it might be a half-hour interview that was originally on the TV, the full unedited hour and a half, for example. They put specials on. They did things that were outside the box and thought differently. And they had this League Live program where it was basically like a panel discussion program, like your breakfast TV, like the old big breakfast used to be, for example, where you have a panel and you'll have a chat. And it might last an hour, it might last 3 hours, it might last 4 hours. But because the situation was so fluid when it came to the NRL in Australia, because there was constant news breaking every day about players misbehaving and rumours about maybe we lose the whole season, discussions going on with state and national government about financial support. Actually, it was quite interesting watching, day by day how the pandemic was unfolding. I actually watched a lot of them, and it was actually really interesting to watch how that 8 weeks unfolded before the resumption of play in Australia. It was really interesting to see each day how it developed and how the discussions were had in regards to the developments, the suspension of play. The Todd Greenberg getting sacked and replaced with Andrew Abdo, Peter Volandes taking a more forthright public role in the running of the game, and then the rule changes, and then the debate about the role of having two or one referee, two referees, one referee, and how they changed the refereeing and officiating of games. There was a lot happening in that 8 weeks. They did a lot of work in that 8 weeks behind the scenes. Same with the AFL. They had a similar setup where they had these broadcasts where it was a panel broadcast where you would have someone presenting and then you had two ex-players or a journo and an ex-player, and they were discussing what's happened in the last 24 hours, what progress has been made, what hypotheticals could happen. And it was really interesting. And I wish they carried it on. I wish they had that in the off season. Like, here's what's happening day by day. This is breaking news. This is the player movement. This is what's because in the off season it's dull. Unless a player misbehaves or a coach misbehaves, it's dull, frankly. But it is quite funny how much BT and Sky are on the back foot in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, hey, we were discussing there's a virus in China. It's not going to hit us, and then we started getting cases in Europe this time 2 years ago, and yeah, so much has changed in the last 2 years since it was declared a pandemic. And it was outside China and stuff. So much has happened in the last 2 years that is worth discussing. A lot has changed. But what I think has damaged the reputation of the TV companies, especially when it comes to football, is there was already a growing backlash, I think, against the price of tickets, the changing of match day kickoff times in not just football but rugby union, rugby league as well to suit the TV market. Match going fans being put last, the debate about the 3 o'clock blackout when it came to football, allegedly to protect attendance, even though attendances across the board have been dropping and empty seats have been rising in recent years. And then you have the pandemic, and then you have the shutdown, and then you have, in the years leading up to the pandemic, clubs earning, basically boasting, oh, we don't really have to charge our fans more than a tenner maximum. We could actually let them go in for free, really, and it wouldn't affect us. And in reality, us going to games was far more important than the clubs claimed that we were. That really blew back in their face. The losses some of these, super European financial powerhouses have had is ridiculous. It just shows how badly run and exposed they are to any kind of financial or economic crisis. This is what surprises me. Over the last 20 years, we've had several recessions, we've had the banking crash, yet football, for some reason, has had these exploding salaries, exploding expenditure, and exploding profits for some clubs. Massive amounts of money made. And what we've seen is the Champions League and Europa League has been taken off free-to-air TV because the free-to-air, like ITV and Channel 5, for example, just couldn't match what Sky and BT were offering when it came to the TV. And Sky, ironically, couldn't match what BT were willing to pay for the Europa League and Champions League. I'm not sure BT can sustain that kind of money because they are hemorrhaging money anyway. But Sky and ITV were very, very, and Channel 5 were very upset when the European Cup competitions were solely on BT. I think that was not correct. I think that was a poor decision by the regulator in this country, which ironically is the BBC gives licenses to channels. So, yeah, massive frustration with fans. That's led to a drop in viewership figures. Ironically, who would have thought? So there's already been a lot of frustration from fans about, losing the free-to-air coverage of the Champions League and the Europa League, group stage proper all the way through. Massive frustration there, and disappointment. The constant rise of ticket prices, even though with all this money meant to be coming into the game with the TV deal, until the pandemic, falling attendances at the FA Cup, which were very noticeable. This season, very noticeable when fans are allowed back in. Crowds actually ironically up. Oh, guess what? More free-to-air coverage as well. So that's noticeable. You get more free-to-air coverage. Attendances are also up. So it sort of goes hand in hand, doesn't it? And yet we're told, we've got to protect the 3 o'clock kickoff. No, we don't. It doesn't matter if it's on the free-to-air TV or not. Fans will. Not everyone can go to every game. And yeah, there's been a growing frustration with how sport is run, how it's governed, and the big TV companies are. Yeah, there's been a lot of um, pressure, I think, put upon them in recent years as well. So we'll see what happens at the next round of TV negotiations. I hope free to air TV gets a look in for the European competitions again. Hope it gets a look in for more league games as well. It doesn't matter if it's the Premier League, Championship, League One, League Two. I hope they get a look in for more free to air coverage in the next TV rights deal, which I think there will be pressure to put free to air coverage in the slot. If Channel 4 are picking up Super League, I think there's going to be growing calls to get more regular season non FA Cup football on free to air TV. Growing calls to get cricket back on free to air TV, other than the 100, which we don't want. Rugby union's obviously got the internationals, but I think there's going to be growing calls to get more club rugby union on the TV. And yeah, we'll see what happens. Do I think Lukaku is better than Kane? He's won trophies. He may not have scored as many goals, but he's won trophies. So if you look at his trophy cabinet, his winners' medals, he's got some. Harry Kane doesn't. And I've said on that one, really. Whether he's an actual better individual player is a different thing, but as a team player, what he's done in the game, the teams he's been a part of, being an integral part to the success of those teams, yeah, he's got winners' medals and Harry Kane doesn't. Now, that doesn't say how good he is as an individual player on goals scored, games played, his goal to game ratio. Harry Kane, I think, has got a better goal to game ratio, but Lukaku has got trophies to his name where he's part of a team that's won silverware, whereas Harry Kane has won nothing as a team player. An individual player's won golden boots, absolutely. But when it comes to success, I think Lukaku is a better all-round team player than Harry Kane. On an individual standpoint, they also have slightly different physicalities and different roles as a centre forward. They do different roles. They may play in a similar position, but their roles are different as well. So Lukaku, I think, is a different one. I wouldn't say Ronaldo is the best striker in the league either. Ronaldo is more of a winger. So again, Ronaldo's role is different to Lukaku's as well. When you're trying to compare players who play slightly different roles and in different formations and different styles, it's very, very difficult. If you're comparing them individually, Ronaldo is obviously better than Lukaku. Lukaku's better than Kane when it comes to success they've won on the pitch. If you're comparing them individually, Ronaldo, Kane, Lukaku for goals scored, for goals per game ratio, but Lukaku's role is different to Kane's, which is different to Ronaldo's with what they are told to do within a team. That's the key point there, is their roles are different even though they play in the attacking third of the pitch. Yeah, Lewandowski should have won the Ballon d'Or for me. That was at least the last 2 years, so that's a complete and utter joke. And I think even Messi went, no, this is not right. Lewandowski for me is the most consistent striker over the last 3 years. And his goals per game ratio proves that. And I would argue the German league is more competitive than the Spanish league that Messi's been playing in for the majority of the time. So, yeah, for me, Robert Lewandowski is the better striker right now. I think any Premier League team would want to have Lewandowski in their side. To pry him away from Bayern is going to be a stupid amount of money, and only a handful of clubs can actually afford his buyout clause just to talk to him, to afford his clause in his contract, to then have to sign him. So yeah, I would argue Robert Lewandowski is probably the best striker in the world right now for consistency. It's can you imagine him in the Premier League? He would fit any Premier League side right now. But it doesn't matter if Man City all the way down to Burnley at the bottom. You could slot him into any Premier League side, and instantly they're a better team. And I think Man City could actually use Robert Lewandowski's style of player. Bear in mind, he's actually played for Pep as well, which is really interesting when he was at Bayern. So there is a definite. You could argue Lewandowski should be playing in the Premier League. I'm not sure he necessarily fit into the Liverpool system, but he would definitely fit into the Man City system. They would have to change a little bit, but it gives him a focal point up front. He could definitely fit in the Chelsea system. They're used to having that big striker who can hold up play, but also he's like a Drogba basically. He's just a better version of Didier Drogba, I think, with what he brings to the game. Imagine if he went to Blackburn instead of Dortmund. Yes, how different that would have been. How different that would have been. But that's all hypothetical. When obviously he was a young player coming through, we were a Premier League side. That's hypothetical. The what ifs, the question marks behind that. But I wouldn't say Man United saying Lukaku was a big mistake. He didn't fit that system. He didn't fit that team effectively. But that's Man United having struggles with recruiting the wrong players for what they want the team to do. Man United's recruitment policies have been all over the place. If Lukaku was playing 20 years ago, absolutely, that'd be the correct signing for Man United. It'd be a mistake to let him go from the team. But Lukaku, with what he brings and what he needs around him, Man United didn't work. With the lack of idea of how they want to play, it didn't work. If you have an idea of how you want your team to play and a philosophy, it works. Under Ferguson, Lukaku would have been a perfect signing, and I think he would have, if he's playing 20 years ago, it's a perfect signing. But yeah, if only that Icelandic volcano all those years ago didn't blow up and erupt. Hindsight. Thank you, Mother Nature. Mother Nature cost us Lewandowski. Again, that's hindsight. Imagine if we'd signed him, I don't think we'd get relegated. Things could have been so much different. But then again, we had the Venky's in charge. So, but he was a lot cheaper back then. I would rather have Lukaku because he's less of a disruption in the dressing room than Pogba. He's less of a disruption, and he will do the closing down, and he will be physical up front. I wouldn't expect Lukaku to do all the tracking back, but again, different role. Pogba is more of a midfielder, Lukaku's more of a striker, but you can see in Lukaku's play when he's feeling happy and feeling motivated, he will do a lot of the pressing. He will get involved, being physical, challenging the centre backs, fighting for every ball. If he's not in possession, he will lead the line in a physical manner. Pogba is too inconsistent and too lazy. So I'd rather have Lukaku in my side than Pogba. Mic drop. Probably a very popular decision with fans in general. If you're building a team out of all the available players currently playing in the top leagues structures around Europe, definitely would definitely have Lukaku over the Pog. I'd rather have the Lukaku over the Pog. Simply because he's going to be physical every game. He's going to put 110% of effort in every game. Even if he's not having the best game, he'll still be making the runs, doing the press, linking up the play with other players. Even if he's not scoring, he's creating space for the attacking midfielder or the winger to come in or lay off the ball. If you have him in a strike partnership with the two, he will create space for his strike partner to run off that shoulder. And he's got very deft feet for a big man. He puts the effort in. Whereas Pogba, he's brilliant one game, useless the next. In games, he goes missing. He's brilliant, not consistent enough, not enough focus, not enough teamwork. And that's the problem with Man United. There's too many egos. There's too many individuals. It doesn't matter who the manager is. All of them have struggled to get something out of this side, and they should have stuck with Van Gaal for a couple more seasons. But the ball went. You're playing boring football. It was pragmatic, and it was getting results and keeping Man United relevant. Mourinho, again, boring football, but he won a trophy, and then the players stopped playing for him, which I do not understand. Quite frankly, I do not understand the attitude of the players. So there you go. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions. Thankfully, this live stream was not disrupted by my neighbours, but it was disrupted by my washing machine finishing. So I've got to get me washing out the washing machine so it dries overnight. Thank you very much for all your questions, all the topics we discussed. And of course, Rafa Benitez getting sacked by Everton is the big story. We'll see who they name as his replacement in the coming days and weeks. But it'll be very interesting, who they get in and will they do anything else in the transfer window without a manager, because this is a very weird time for that kind of managerial change. So watch this space with Everton. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos for you in the coming days. So keep your eyes peeled, and thank you very much. And I'll see you all very, very soon.